Welcome to This Explainer. Grab a seat and get your notes ready, because today we're treating this session like a high-level corporate consulting workshop. If you're a university student or honestly just anyone whose success depends on writing powerfully, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're mastering the art of academic structure. We're going to take the principles of high-level intellectual design and turn them into your personal playbook for architecting absolutely rock-solid academic arguments.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've all been there, right? You've done the reading, you have a massive brainstorm full of brilliant, world-changing ideas, but when you actually sit down to write, it just turns into a chaotic mess. You're staring at that mocking, blinking cursor at 3 a.m. in a caffeine-fueled panic, just typing whatever comes to mind. You hand it in, hoping for the best, and a week later it comes back bleeding red ink with a miserable grade. So why does this happen? Well, the pain point entirely stems from spontaneous, messy writing. We have this idea that if we just start typing, the structure will magically reveal itself halfway down page 4. Spoiler alert, it definitely doesn't.
So, here's our roadmap for today's playbook. First, we'll cover the academic structure myth. Second, strategy over spontaneity. Third, the 3-step framework. And fourth, adapting by genre. You're going to walk away with a very specific methodology for logical design.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the academic structure myth.
We've got to start by breaking down the absolute biggest misconception students have about writing, because it is fundamentally holding back your grades. There's this widespread myth that structure is just a formal rule. We view it as this external thing you mechanically comply with just to satisfy a professor. We tend to equate structure with technical formatting. Actually, scratch that. We literally fixate on it. We stress over 1-inch margins, specific fonts, word counts, or rigid citation styles. But that is completely backwards. If you're obsessing over margins while the examiner is just desperately trying to understand your core argument, you've completely lost the plot. The absolutely crucial point here is that structure is an intellectual tool. It's not about making the paper look pretty. It's about building meaning. When you use structure as an intellectual strategy, it establishes your credibility and guides your reader's logic seamlessly from the introduction all the way to the conclusion.
Moving right along to Section 2, strategy over spontaneity.
Let's get into our next crucial paradigm shift, the battle between raw spontaneity and disciplined planning. Look, writing spontaneously might feel super creative in the moment, but winging it is an incredibly risky strategy. When you just pour thoughts onto the page, hoping a solid structure forms out of thin air, the result is almost always a jumbled mess. Your ideas repeat endlessly, the focus drifts from paragraph to paragraph, and your core concepts never truly develop any real depth. But more importantly, you fail to provide a conceptual map for your reader. Think of your academic structure like a high-end GPS. If you don't map out your argument in advance, your reader is forced to play this frustrating guessing game trying to figure out where on earth you're taking them. And trust me, a confused, frustrated professor does not hand out A grades. Planning an outline centered around your research question is absolutely necessary to control your scope right from the start.
Which brings us to Section 3, the 3-step framework.
Now that we know exactly why we need a plan, let's shift from theory into execution. This is the core framework of today's workshop. Every single piece of academic writing can be broken down into 3 deliberate intellectual moves. Step 1 is the strategic introduction. Step 2 is your layered body arguments. And Step 3 is the intellectual synthesis. Treating these not as generic fill-in-the-blank sections, but as functional, strategic moves, well, that's exactly what separates an average student from a top-tier scholar. Let's zoom in on Step 1. The defining feature of your strategic introduction is the thesis. But we desperately need to redefine what a thesis actually is. It's not just a random sentence you slap at the end of your first paragraph to check a box on a rubric. Your thesis is the intellectual compass of the entire document. It has to organically arise from identifying a specific problem, a gap in current knowledge, or a scholarly tension. For example, a bad generic thesis is, "In this paper, I will discuss the impact of social media." That's not a compass, that's just a topic. A strong scholarly tension looks more like, while social media platforms were designed to democratize communication, they paradoxically create isolated echo chambers, revealing a tension between global connectivity and localized polarization. Boom. By starting with a real problem like that, you prove to your reader that your paper is born from a genuine intellectual need. Your thesis becomes your definitive answer to that problem, guiding every single word that follows. Once you have your compass, you enter Step 2, the body. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it explicitly rejects the idea of a single-string linear argument. Think of a linear argument like a flimsy house of cards. If your reader disagrees with one single point, the whole paper just collapses.
Instead, your body arguments need to be layered, like a solid brick wall. You aren't just making one fragile claim, you're actively stacking conceptual explanations, theoretical support, empirical analysis, and critical evaluation right on top of each other. This layered approach ensures your thesis is fortified by a highly coherent, interlocking network of robust arguments. To successfully build those layers, you must deeply understand the hierarchy of your body paragraphs. You have to clearly differentiate your high-level core claims from your granular supporting evidence. The evidence, whether that's your datasets, interview quotes, or historical dates, it can't just be dumped onto the page. You have to actively avoid the trap of merely describing data. Don't just tell the reader what the quote says, tell them exactly why that quote proves your conceptual point. Ensure every piece of evidence points directly back to validating your main thesis. Basically, treat every single paragraph as a specific functional unit. Maybe paragraph A builds a conceptual foundation, paragraph B presents the empirical evidence, and paragraph C tackles an opposing viewpoint. It has to have a clear, undeniable logical flow.
Finally, we reach step 3. Guys, please, whatever you do, do not just copy and paste your introduction. Change a few verbs and call it a conclusion. Your conclusion is an intellectual synthesis. It's a profound process of creating new meaning. This is where you pull all those layered body arguments together to definitively answer your core research question. Ask yourself, what is the ultimate so what of my contribution? This is your space to assert your value to the field, reflect on the implications, and even boldly suggest future research. You want the reader putting your paper down with a profound sense of why your analysis actually matters to the real world.
Let's wrap things up with Section 4, Adapting Structure by Genre.
Look, a truly great consultant doesn't just use one framework blindly for every single client, right? And a great academic writer doesn't force every assignment into the exact same mold either. You have to learn strategic flexibility. Your structure is entirely driven by your specific intellectual purpose. So, if you're tackling an argumentative essay, your core logic revolves around defending a clear thesis against counter-arguments. Your structure will layer arguments purely to answer why and how. But switch gears to a conceptual paper, and suddenly you're focused on comparing themes, abstract definitions, and competing theories. In that case, your structure is going to be thematic and analytic, rather than strictly linear. Or if you're doing a text or discourse analysis, your primary focus shifts to critical interpretation, driven by distinct linguistic strategies and textual evidence. The rule of thumb here? Form always follows function.
If you take absolutely nothing else away from this workshop today, let it be this central truth right here. Structure is an intellectual design, not a fixed formula. You can't just memorize a uniform template and lazily force every paper into it. You have to act with strategic flexibility because you are the architect of your own logic. Every single time you sit down to write, before your hands even touch the keyboard, ask yourself, what is the purpose of this writing? What genre am I working in? And what specific structure will most effectively deliver my argument? So, I'm going to leave you with this ultimate question to ponder as we log off today. Is your next paper going to be a strategic, highly intentional architectural masterpiece that smoothly guides your reader's mind? Or is it just going to be another messy, stressful pile of random ideas? The blueprint is now firmly in your hands. It's time to get to work. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy architecting.